Mr. Hitchens?
I think Brooks is right in saying there is an anti-congressional demagogic mood around, and all kinds of people are trying to cash in on it, and I think that's depressing.
Harper's, your magazine, right here on the front page, an article by Christopher Hitchens. What's this all about?
It's about how the opinion poll racket, the opinion poll industry, has tried to substitute for a democracy. It's tried to substitute for the electoral process.
When did you write it?
I finished it just before the New Hampshire primary results.
How did you study the opinion polling process?
Well, I went to New Hampshire and I compared the various polling processes up there. I talked to some former pollsters, noticeably Pat Cadell, who used to be Mr. Democrat in the 70s and 80s and used to be, it was thought, able to elect practically anyone. And then I conducted a poll of my own in New Hampshire by lifting the telephone and dialing people at random and trying to fill out the questionnaire that pollsters use. And I found that most voters' answers were too intelligent for the sort of questions that polls are made up of.
Is the electorate manipulated by polls?
Yes. The people who invest all this money in polling are not doing it for nothing. They're not doing it just to find out what people think. They're doing it to try and influence what people think. Who would spend all that money just to find out what was going on? They want to be able to predict it, and they want to be able, therefore, to mold it. So it's an intervention in the political process. And as we were saying a little earlier, you notice how the consensus at the moment is we don't need any more elections. We've already got a candidate. Now, that was being said about Bill Clinton on the basis of polling before one vote had been cast in New Hampshire.
But the most important poll is the poll of the press corps. When Hendrik Hertzberg went up and he conducted his traditional poll of the press corps in New Hampshire, he interviewed 24 reporters. Every single one said their candidate was Clinton. An astonishing degree of unanimity, even for PAC journalism. Does that kind of poll lead to these other polls?
In fact, there are two polls, aren't there, that they call the invisible primary, or sometimes called the Beltway primary. There's the money primary and the press primary, and Clinton had both of those locked up, the fundraising primary particularly, well before the votes were cast. Actually, in New Hampshire, what I found was that even the reporters who weren't for Clinton worked for newspapers or news editors who certainly were, and who didn't want any bad news about him. So they may have been annexed in that way. But yes, it's extraordinary how the invisible primary decides before any front runner emerges.
Do you like polls? I mean, for instance, Christopher Hitchens writes about the Wall Street Journal NBC poll here and how they used to have Bob Teeter, who is running the campaign for George Bush, and on the other side, a Democrat, Peter Hart, and that he points out that, you know, that Al Hunt, the bureau chief here, is a friend of both of them, and you tell us why. Why did you point that out? What was the reason?
Well, I point out that, I mean, it used to be the case that newspapers would wonder, should we commission our own opinion poll? The New York Times used to wonder this particularly. If we do, should we report it as news on the front page, if it's our poll and we've paid for it? And should we put a reporter's byline on it? These were considered ethical questions. Now, no newspaper would think twice about doing anything of the sort. I gave the Journal as an example because it seemed like, you know, you have the perfect bipartisan instance of Bush's pollster, Mondale's former pollster, so you've got the two-party racket there. Then a very powerful bureau chief who's often on TV and very much a molder of the consensus. And then finally, a set of findings which I thought were contradicted by the alienation question that the Journal had asked, which was to the target force of likely Reagan Democrat voters. Do you or do you not think, went the question, that the institutions of the country are rigged against people like yourself? And the answer was nearly 60% said yes to that, which is a bit of a verdict on the consensus.
Mr. Fine, what about the Journal and its poll?
My favorite poll is the exit poll, because it's taken after people vote. And I wish they wouldn't be reported or hinted at early in network broadcasts. I think that kind of poll has very valuable information. I think a lot of the other polls ask simplistic questions and they don't properly evaluate voters' sophisticated answers. I agree with Mr. Hitchens. As for the Journal, I'll simply say that I think most of our polling results are reported in a fairly sophisticated way, and at least we don't use banner headlines.
Last Monday, when we started this program out, there was a little tiny